Good evening. I hereby call to order the January 26th, 2015 meeting of Mayfield Heights City Council. May I have a roll call, please?
Mr. DeJohn?
Here.
Mr. Mano?
Here.
Mr. Mercurio?
Here.
Mr. Monaco?
Here.
Mrs. Sabetta?
Here.
Mr. Sharia?
Here.
Mrs. Teresi?
Here. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. We will now move on to the approval of our minutes from the January 12th, 2015 meeting. I hope everyone's had the opportunity to look over the minutes. Are there any changes, deletions, or questions? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve the minutes? Moved by Mr. Mercurio, seconded by Mr. Mano. Changes, deletions? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
The minutes have been approved as written. Next, we will move on to correspondence and announcements. Does any member of council have any correspondence or announcements they'd like to share? Seeing none, we will move on to reports of officers, and we will begin with the mayor. Mayor DeSico?
Thank you, Madam President. Good evening. And I'm glad to see that we seem to have dodged the impending blizzard and that the Seahawks and the Patriots have made it to Arizona, beating the storm that is bearing down on New England. But seriously, my thoughts are with all those who will be hunkering down and all the public safety and public service forces who will be out serving in those dangerous conditions. I had the pleasure to administer the oath of office this month to 5 new auxiliary officers. I look forward to their contribution to the city. I wanted to note that the auxiliary unit donated a total of 2,600 hours to the city last year. This is just one piece of the data that is included in our next edition of the City Focus. And that City Focus will be in the mailboxes next week. That is our State of the City edition, which provides insight into the services provided by each department in 2014. And I encourage you to take some time to peruse the statistics in there. I met recently with members of the Cuyahoga County Planning Commission and the County Green Space Planner regarding trail projects. A follow-up meeting will be held this week with members of the East Side Greenway Project. The second round of meetings for the East Side Greenway Project will begin this week. The meeting is closest proximity to our border will be held on Thursday, January 29th from 7 to 9 at the Beechwood Public Library, and I encourage residents to attend. Sean Ward and I met with POD, the company that is going over the master plan for the park. We went over a very preliminary plan for the master plan for the park. The layout, like I said, was very preliminary and was just to make sure that we had all of the amenities and accommodations that we think we need for events. So I hope to get something from them very soon as far as a plan and an idea of costs also. If you can mark your calendars for the 2015 Community Unity Days, which has a new date. The event will be held this year in June on the 26th, 27th, and 28th, and it will include all the usual features, including fireworks, parade, and the bocce tournament. And that concludes my report this evening.
Thank you, Mayor. Are there any questions for the mayor? Mr. Monaco?
Mr. Mayor, I was reading in the Sun news that this new proposed trails that they're going to be installing would end at Richmond Road and then go north on Richmond Road, then ultimately to our park. Does that mean that it's not going to come down Gizmos Boulevard to possibly 91?
Madam President? It's very preliminary, but that's the idea, is to incorporate the boulevard in the ideas, absolutely, because that makes us the most sense for also connecting it to Shaker down through that way. So it's very preliminary in its design and in discussion, but when the meetings I've been at, that was the discussion, was to incorporate Gates Mills Boulevard.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for the mayor? Next, we will move on to the report from our Director of Law, Mr. Murphy.
Thank you, Madam President. I have no report per se this evening, but I would like to note that on the agenda is resolution number 2015-6, which is a resolution authorizing the city to enter into an agreement with the law firm of Henderson, Schmidlin, and McGarry. By way of background, on January 1st, I joined the law firm of Henderson, Schmidlin, and McGarry as a partner, and I will continue in that job. I've asked Ray Schmidlin, who is another partner of the law firm, to be here this evening, and he's sitting in the audience. Ray, would you stand up, please? Well, you can come up to the podium. Yeah, why don't you come up to the podium? May as well grow you.
Please state your name and address at the podium.
Just where?
Right there?
Hi. My name is Ray Schmidlin Jr. My business address is 840 Brainerd Road, Highland Heights. My residential address is 5253 Thornberry in Lyndhurst.
Thank you. One of the upshots of my new association is providing more backup and legal expertise for the city as well as the city of Lyndhurst. If I'm not available, Ray would be the first person to contact, either by email or at the phone number for the firm. We have 6 attorneys who are seasoned, experienced attorneys and seasoned litigators, so we can perform a lot of things for the city. So at any time, if any members of council or the mayor have any questions, I'd be able to answer them, or if you'd like to grill Ray a little bit there, that's fine too. But I just wanted to introduce him and put a name with a face, so that if you did have any occasion to contact the firm and I wasn't there, Ray would be the first one to talk to. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. Any questions for Mr. Murphy or Mr. Schmidlin? Thank you. Next, we will move on to a report from our Director of Finance, Mr. Tribby.
I have no report, but Mr. Monaco's reference to that Greenway project, I noticed the map in the Plain Dealer on Sunday, I think, mislabeled Richmond Road. That's really Somme. That's not Richmond. So I think that answers your question. It's going to be coming through town. So.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tribby. Are there any questions for Mr. Tribby? Okay, we will move on to reports of committees, commissions, and boards, and we will begin with the Building Committee. Mr. Mano.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. We have a tentative date of February 19th set for a joint meeting with ABR and legislative and building committees to go over a workshop on fencing, materials, placement, etc. And hopefully that'll happen on the 19th, and we'll take a giant step forward on changing some of that ordinance. That's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Mano. Are there any questions for Mr. Mano? I would just like to add that I have reached out to a planner, and right now he's out of town, he's in Florida, but I've reached out to Mr. Bob Perry, who was for many years with the city of Westlake, and asked if he would like to come before us and speak, and if he'd be interested in looking at some of our ordinances that are antiquated and are codified. So I'm waiting for him to return from his vacation, and then I'll set up a time that works for everyone. We'll do a committee of the whole meeting. Thank you, Mr. Mano. We'll move on to the Finance and Audit Committee. Mr. Mercurio.
Thank you, Madam President. The Finance and Audit Committee did meet on January 13th. We had a representative from the alternative energy source that came to speak with us about a third-party energy supply program. He reviewed some of the potential savings to the city if we were to partake in such a program. And I think everyone was in agreement that we should at some point be part of a program. And I know that Mr. Monaco agreed to look at some other alternatives for us. So once that research is complete, we'll regroup again and determine what's best for the city. Second item on the agenda was a discussion about the compensation of elected officials. We all agreed upon a philosophy going forward. I did meet with Mr. Murphy, and right now he is in the process of drafting some legislation for us.
Thank you very much. Mr. Monaco, have you done any further review?
Yes, I have. I've made some phone calls. I had a little difficulty in getting I wanted a list of all the participants in that program in the area. And at first I was told that the mayor had it and I was supposed to get it from the mayor, but after I insisted, I finally got it. I made some phone calls, and it seems to be a very good company, very reliable, and I think I'm pleased to say that I would like to go with them.
You're referring to the company that Mr. Mercurio.
Correct.
So the alternative energy
Alternative
source.
Energy sources.
Great.
Great. Thank you very much. Mayor.
Madam President, coincidentally, last week, I was approached by another third-party supplier, and so we will at least have somebody to compare with. He spoke with Mr. Tribby, and I think he'll be able to get us a quote, and that way we'll have something to compare to.
Mr. Mercurio.
Mayor, did he give you a time frame on that at all?
He's anxious, so it won't be too long.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Mercurio? We will move on to the Legislative Committee. Mr. Monaco.
Thank you. Shortly after the Finance Committee meeting, we had a meeting regarding the legislative matters that we had before us, and two items were discussed. One actually was not on the agenda, but it took quite a bit of our time. The first one was regarding the grass ordinance in the city, and I have drafted an ordinance, and I have provided my every member of council with a copy. I would hope that you would have some time to review it, and if you think that there's any changes to be made, I would like to be made aware of that so that we can make the changes and then give it to the law director for final approval. The changes that I made to the grass ordinance will be the 2 days. The homeowner or the resident would have 2 days notice to cut the grass. The next change that I made was that the grass height in the current ordinance, I believe it's 7 inches. It's 8 inches. We propose to go to 7 inches. In a commercial vacant property, the current height is 10 inches, and I'm proposing to go with 7 inches. We added a third option to a server notice. Before you had to personally deliver to the owner. You could deliver by mail-in to the regular certified mail at the usual place of business. We also I added a third one that would say that if you post a notice at a contiguous place on the land involved, it would suffice. And again, we need to check with the law director if that would be acceptable. Then another addition that we made was that there would be only one notice that would be sent to the homeowner. Any violation after that would be taken care of from the city, but no additional notice would be mailed out or sent or posted on the property. The second item on the agenda, the one that was actually scheduled, was regarding the fence ordinance. There were some suggestion to raise the fees from $10 that we currently have to the $40. There was some suggestion about removing the 30% rule of solid fence. There's talk about having only one style of fence on one single property. We also had discussion regarding possibly having contractors only install the fence instead of homeowners. The possibility of having the architecture review board review fences was also brought up. And the involvement of the building department was also discussed, along with the necessity of probably better enforcement. And finally, a need for a planning consultant was brought up, and we thought it was a good idea to bring a couple candidates so we could interview and they could eventually kind of guide us in making some decision here. So, Madam President, I also have one candidate that I called that it will be interested in being interviewed. He is a resident of Cleveland Heights. He served a few cities. The last one he was working for was Oberlin, and I'm sure that he also would like to be considered. This concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Monaco. And if you would like to get a hold of that gentleman, or if you'd like me to, I'd be happy to do that so we can hear from more than one person.
We could do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Monaco? Mr. Mano?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. First of all, I want to thank you for the work you did on this. It's very good. The only thing that I would like to see change, here is we on commercial land, and I will specifically note the corner of Lander and Cedar. We were saying that we would have them cut the grass within 20 feet of the public right-of-way. And at that meeting, I believe our discussion was that that piece and other commercial pieces should be entirely cut at least once a month. Because the grass situation there gets out of hand, the grass gets very high, and I mean, if there's a car in there, you can't see it from Lander Road because of the tall grass. So that would be the only thing I'd like to see changed in this ordinance that you worked on. I think it should be noted that commercial properties should be cut in their entirety once a month.
Thank you, Mr. Mano.
Thank you.
We will next move on to Public Works and Services, Mr. Sharia.
Thank you. The service department has been experimenting with magnesium salt, and they're not happy with it. So it looks like they'll stay with what we've got. And beside that, what we have is a lot cheaper, okay? They're also painting, believe it or not, at this point in time, the inside of the pool and also the salt bin. The inside. That concludes my report.
Thank you, Mr. Sharia. Are there any questions for Mr. Sharia? Seeing none, we will move on to Recreation and Parks Committee, Mrs. Sabetta.
Thank you, Madam President. The Winter Frozen Land Fairy Tale Party on Saturday, January 31st, has still a limited amount of tickets for sale. You can come from 1 to 3 at the Ross DeJohn Community Center and see Elsa and Anna join for a story, crafts, snacks, and pictures. Recommended for children 3 to 10. Limit of 2 adults per child. The tickets are $15 per person. Call the Recreation Department for reservations. The 8th annual Taste of Italy on Valentine's Day. Tickets are now on sale. Join us with your Valentine for a wonderful evening at the Ross DeJohn Community Center. Doors open at 6:30 with appetizers and an open beer and wine bar. Dinner will be served at 7:30, concluding with an array of Italian desserts, door prizes, and our Chinese auctions. Cost is $30 per person. Reservations are required. Call the Recreation Department to reserve. at 440-442-2627. The second annual Family Fun Night, Saturday, February 21st, from 6 to 9 at the Wildcat Sport and Fitness. Families of the school district can enjoy carnival, games, inflatables, music, and food for all ages. Bring the whole family and break out of the winter doldrums. Adult afternoon out lunches. Black tie optional. Tuesday, February 10th. The menu is marinara sauce with sausage and peppers over ziti pasta. Salad, garlic bread, dessert, coffee, optional glass of wine. Entertainment to be announced. The Parks and Recreation has several ordinance and one motion on the agenda tonight. As they come up, we can address them. Mr. Ward from the Park and Rec is in the audience to answer any questions. Our next Parks and Recreation meeting is Tuesday, January 26th at 7 p.m., which is tomorrow in council chambers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Sabetta. Are there any questions for Mrs. Sabetta? Thank you. We will move on to Safety and Transportation Committee, Mr. DeJohn.
Thank you, Madam President. Well, I had a chance to speak with Chief Bittner, our police chief, and we were discussing some of his short and long-term goals. And we had a discussion on the remodeling of the police department. He has some remodeling he wants to do to create a better working environment for his officers. And we also discussed his plans for his mobile data terminals and video cameras in the police cruisers, as well as having body cameras for all of his officers. So I'd like to have a committee of the whole meeting so he could further discuss this with us all. And maybe at that time, we can also discuss some of these building issues as well as legislative issues at this committee of the whole meeting. That concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DeJohn. We'll work with Lisa to get that scheduled. Are there any questions for Mr. DeJohn? Next, we will move on to the Board of Zoning Appeals, Mr. Mercurio.
Thank you, Madam President. We do not have any items on tonight's agenda, and our next meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, February 10th.
Thank you. Are there questions for Mr. Mercurio? We'll move on to Commission on Aging, which is my report. The commission will meet on February 3rd at 5 p.m. here in council chambers, and all are welcome. That concludes my report. Are there any questions on the Commission on Aging? Okay. We will move now to Planning Commission, Mr. DeJohn.
Thank you, Madam President. I have no report. We didn't meet for lack of an agenda.
Thank you very much. Questions for Mr. DeJohn? We will move to the Mayfield Union Cemetery, Mrs. Sabetta.
Thank you, Madam President. I did receive correspondence from the trustee, Patsy Mills, and she states that the balance has been paid to all cemetery works, and the wreath at the Halliday grave site and the front of the grave site will be removed in the spring, and our next meeting will be at the cemetery in April. She also wished all of us a Happy New Year. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Sabetta. Are there any questions for Mrs. Sabetta? We will now move on to our public portion. Pursuant to Section 121.02, Section H8 of the Codified Ordinances of the city, each person will be allotted 5 minutes to speak, with a maximum of 30 minutes allotted for the entire public portion. Although it is not a time for public debate, this is your opportunity to address council with your concerns. Please know that no personal attacks or comments will be allowed. Also, if you are here in connection with an item on the agenda, this is your opportunity to come forward and address council. If you would like to be heard this evening, please raise your hand and be recognized, and then approach the podium. State your name and address. It is now 7:27, and we will open the public portion. Is there anyone who would like to come forward and speak? Okay. Seeing none, I will close the public portion. It is now 7:28, and the public portion has been closed. We will now move on to resolutions. Resolution 2015-5, Mr. Murphy.
Thank you. Resolution number 2015-5, a resolution providing for the employment of a traffic engineering firm for the city of Mayfield Heights and declaring an emergency. First reading.
Is there a motion to suspend the rules? Moved by Mr. Monaco, seconded by Mrs. Sabetta. Roll call on the motion to suspend.
Mr. Mano?
Yes.
Mr. Mercurio?
Yes.
Mr. DeJohn?
Yes.
Mrs. Sabetta?
Yes?
Mr. Monaco?
Yes.
Mr. Sharia?
yes,
Mrs. Tressi?
Yes. Do I have a motion to approve? Moved by Mr. Mercurio, seconded by Mr. Mano. We received a memo from Mr. Tribby and a copy of the contract from TMS Engineers. Mr. Tribby, would you like to add anything?
I have nothing else to add. It's just a renewal of last year's contract with the same rates.
At the same rates. Are there any questions for Mr. Tribby? Roll call on the motion to approve.
Mr. DeJohn?
Yes.
Mr. Sharia?
yes,
Mr. Monaco?
Yes.
Mr. Mercurio?
Yes.
Mr. Mano?
Yes.
Mrs. Sabetta?
Yes?
Mrs. Tressi?
Yes. Resolution 2015-5 has been adopted. We will move on to Resolution 2015-6. Mr. Murphy.
Thank you. Resolution number 2015-6, a resolution authorizing the mayor to enter into an agreement with Henderson, Schmidlin, and McGarry Company, LPA, to provide legal services from January 1, 2015 through December 31, 2017, and declaring an emergency. First reading.
Is there a motion to suspend the rules? Moved by Mr. Mano, seconded by Mr. Mercurio. Roll call on the motion to suspend.
Mr. Monaco?
Yes.
Mrs. Sabetta?
Yes?
Mr. Sharia?
yes,
Mr. Mano?
Yes.
Mr. DeJohn?
Yes.
Mr. Mercurio?
Yes.
Mrs. Tressi?
Yes. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Mercurio, seconded by Mrs. Sabetta. Again, in our council package, we received a copy of the agreement to engage the firm of Henderson, Schmidlin, and McGarry, who would be representing the city on various legal matters. Are there any other questions or comments? Seeing, oh, Bob, I'm sorry, Mr. DeJohn.
Just one question. Is this a binding contract, or is there any penalty if?
No, it can be terminated with 30 days' notice by either party at any time, and it also provides that if for whatever reason I do not continue as the director of law, then that would be an opportunity if the city wanted to terminate as well.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
This is just so Mr. Murphy's not a one-man gang, so to speak, anymore. He's got some backup, so basically that's the
Thank you.
reason.
Mr. Murphy doesn't need backup.
But if I do, I've got it.
Any other comments or questions? Roll call on the motion to approve.
Mr. Mercurio?
Yes.
Mr. Monaco?
Yes.
Mrs. Sabetta?
Yes?
Mr. DeJohn?
Yes.
Mr. Sharia?
yes,
Mr. Mano?
Yes.
Mrs. Tressi?
Yes. Resolution 2015-6 has been approved. We will now, I need a motion to move into executive session to discuss negotiations or bargaining sessions with our public employees. Do I have a motion? Moved by Mr. Mercurio, seconded by Mr. Mano. Roll call on the motion.
Mr. Sharia?
yes.
Mr. DeJohn?
Yes.
Mr. Mano?
Yes.
Mr. Mercurio?
Yes.
Mrs. Sabetta?
Yes?
Mr. Monaco?
Yes.
Mrs. Tressi?
Yes, this motion has been carried, and we will now move into executive session.